Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on the Competence Framework, the second edition. This is the fourth in a series of webinars looking at the new Competence Framework, and the focus today is looking at an insight into the benefits for your organisation and your project management community. The webinar will be delivered by myself, Gill Hancock, as Head of Professional Standards and Knowledge at APM, and Nick Jones, Senior Membership Development Manager at APM as well. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the APM YouTube channel by the close of play tomorrow. So if you want to listen again or get some additional information from there, then please feel free to do so. The focus of this webinar really is to start looking at how the competence framework can be used, looking at the benefits that it can bring through analysing skill sets, identifying some of those skill gaps, how it can be used to create teams and team building, and also looking at how it can give you the competitive advantage. Once we've had a look through that, then I'll be handing over to Nick, who can give you more context around the 5 dimensions of professionalism and how the new competence framework fits into the broader picture. Okay. So, in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to have a look at the new competence framework itself and just give a quick overview in relation to that. And why some of the changes have happened, just for those of you who might not have been able to join the previous webinars. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time looking at that, but just want to give you a quick overview. So the new competence framework itself, it is streamlined and easier to use. The number of competencies have reduced from 47 to 27, but we actually now cover project, programme and portfolio management within there. We also have 14 role profiles matched to the new framework as well. So not only do we have the base framework content, but we have the role profiles that support it, and we'll be going into those role profiles in some more detail later on. One of the big benefits of the competence framework is it is an editable framework and can be easily integrated into existing frameworks or used as an out-of-box solution. So if you want to actually use it exactly as it is, then you can do so, or if you want to add in specific competencies to what you're actually developing and how it works within your industry, then that's also possible. It is also cross-referenced to edition 1 of the competence framework and also the IPMA ICB. That's the current version of the ICB rather than the version 4, which is due out later on this year. But once the new version of the IPMA ICB is published, then we will also be publishing the mapping to the ICB4 as well. But if you are currently using the competence framework, there's a mapping between the old framework and the new framework to assist with that. So the 27 competencies that we have, these are the 27 competencies. They cover a broad range of functional areas within project, programme and portfolio management, and also PMO. And the focus of developing these was really about the functions and the things that need to take place to make project, programme, portfolio and PMO management effective. So that's how those competencies were developed. The competencies themselves are set out in this way really. So you have what the competence is. So this example we have in front of us relates to leadership. So you have the definition of the competence. You then have some introductory notes, which just gives a bit more context around what that competence is about. And then you have a number of performance indicators that look at application and knowledge. The intention is that you actually score yourself holistically against those performance indicators in the application side and the knowledge side, rather than looking at each of the individual performance indicators themselves. But you read all the performance indicators, get an idea of what that competence is about, and then give yourself a specific score, one for application and one for knowledge. Okay, so that's how the competencies are set out, and just a little bit of background as to the differences between the old competence framework and the new version, to give you a bit of context. If we move forward then onto a sample role profile, this is one of the big areas of development within the competence framework. So we have the base framework, which has the 27 competencies, but not all of those competencies are relevant to every single role. And one of the things that we found when we were developing the competence framework is actually a lot of the competencies, specifically for project and programme management, are very similar, but it's the context and the complexity with which you're dealing with makes the difference. And again, with some of the portfolio and PMO competencies, they are similar, but it's the context and complexity that does make the difference. Within the framework, there are some specific competencies that only relate to portfolio and only relate to programme roles, and those are detailed within the content of the framework. But what I wanted to do today is just talk you through a sample role profile for the Portfolio Management Office Analyst to give you an idea of how the role profiles within the competence framework actually work. Once we've been through that, we can then start looking at what the benefits are of being able to use the role profiles and how that can benefit you as an organisation and also your project and programme portfolio and PMA communities. So the role profile we have in front of us at the moment, we have an introduction which gives the context of the role, and you then have typical responsibilities. So it sets out what we as a professional body would expect somebody in this role to typically be doing. We know that it doesn't cover absolutely everything within that role, but it's there as a starter for 10 and give an idea of where we see that role sitting. Beneath that, you then have some areas of the competencies that would be developed and used within there, and also the areas they need to have a comprehensive knowledge of. So it's a very good overview, very good definition of what that role then looks like. After that, you then have a table which lists all 27 of the competencies. And what you then have next to that is an application and a knowledge score. So that ranges from a 1 to 5, which is the rating scale that sits alongside the competence framework, with 1 being aware of the competence and 5 being an expert, and the various different levels in between. As you can see in this specific role profile, when we were putting the role profile together, being informed by the PMA community in this case, there are some competencies that weren't deemed to be relevant for this particular role. And there are some that score relatively low in terms of just needing to be aware of that area and those competencies. There are others that score higher, looking at sort of the 3s, the 2s and the 3s within there, and some 4s as well, particularly on the knowledge side. So what this role profile does is it gives the APM view of what somebody working in this role should be able to do, and the competencies and the knowledge they should have and should be able to demonstrate. And that, I think, is incredibly advantageous for a number of reasons. One of those is looking at analysing skill sets. So the role profiles, as I've just described, give you the professional body view of competence and provide a benchmark. The sample that I've just showed you is one of 14 role profiles, and we have role profiles covering project, programme, portfolio and PMO roles. We have 4 role profiles for project, 3 for programme, 3 for portfolio, and then 4 for PMO. And they do give you that professional body view of competence. It does provide a benchmark for you to then benchmark your individuals and your team against. One of the things that you can do is ask your team of staff to complete the assessment and then make a comparison. So you're giving a personal view from your team and your staff as to where they sit, and then doing a comparison against the professional benchmark, professional body benchmark. But it doesn't just have to be an individual view, so it can be done through self-assessment, it can be done through line manager assessment, or it could be a combination of both. You could ask your team to assess themselves against the competencies defined in the role profile, and you could get that verified by a line manager, making sure that you have that checking process in place, which gives you a more solid assessment. Or you could go for a 360-degree assessment as well, that's also an option. And then by comparing that to the professional body view and the benchmark that's there, it really gives the opportunity to play to people's strengths. So if you have people within your team who are particularly good at, for example, financial management or benefits management within there, then actually it's making sure that you can match people to specific pieces of work or potentially specific projects, programmes or portfolios, depending on where you want to be as an organisation. But if you have something that's incredibly critical to you as an organisation, you want somebody who has particular strengths, this is a way of identifying those and being able to move that forward. It's also a way of discovering hidden talents. It might be that you have people that are working within your team or within your organisation that have always done a very similar thing whilst they've been working with you, but actually if you start looking at the competencies and you start to look at the self-assessment, there are various talents that they have that you weren't aware of, and it's a way of highlighting those and then developing those. And like I say, being able to match people to specific projects or particular pieces of work. It's also incredibly useful in terms of identifying skills gaps. So like I was saying, before you do have the professional body view of competence, be able to provide a benchmark. And again, you can get people to complete the assessment, whether it's self-assessment, line manager assessment, or 360-degree assessment. depending on your point of view as an organisation as to whether or not you want to specifically focus on identifying those skills gaps or playing to people's strengths or doing both. By being able to see the difference between the professional body benchmark and the skills within your organisation, it does highlight some of those gaps that are there. But more importantly, once you've identified them, it's then looking at what you can do to start filling them. And Nick will be covering later on some of the 5 dimensions of professionalism and other areas that APM can support you with. But by identifying those skills gaps and really seeing what can be done and what needs to be done, then that gives the opportunity for the organisation and the project management community within your organisation to truly develop and can support professional development plans and activities, and people are also talking a common language and moving towards a common goal. As I was saying earlier, that the competence framework can be used as a specific competence framework as it stands as an out-of-box solution, or it can actually be adapted to allow for sector or business-specific competencies to be added to the framework and to the role profiles. So if you wanted to add into there something specific to your industry or to your organisation, then that allows you to compare and identify those skills gaps in those areas as well as those defined by the professional body and by APM. It's just a reminder there that it can be added to if you wish to. In terms of creating teams and team building, one of the great things about the competence framework is it actually provides a common language with regards to competence. All of the performance indicators are written in outcome terms, so it's very clear to say yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do it, and on what level that you're actually completing that competence at. So by having that common language, people can really start to develop as a team and look at how they're moving forward in terms of their own development, as well as that of the team as well. It can also be good in creating that common goal regarding personal and team development. And it could be that you start to then identify go-to people within a particular team. So if you have particular strengths in some of the competence areas and people need support in those areas, then it's using the competence framework and the language within the competence framework to really identify those people, promote those people, and create that environment which people can actually learn and develop from each other and improve their personal development and the team development at the same time. With regards to creating a competitive advantage and recruiting and retaining staff, particularly with the role profiles that are there in the sample that we looked at before, as the professional body, APM have defined what we see as the typical responsibilities and the competencies that are needed for each of those roles. So if you're looking at setting up a project management community or program management community or recruiting for staff in any of those areas covered by the role profiles, then those role profiles can be really helpful in terms of informing those job descriptions and looking at what the typical responsibilities and day-to-day activities might be for those specific roles. Now obviously every industry is different, every organisation is different, so I wouldn't suggest lifting the role profile directly and making that into a job description, but it can be useful in terms of informing some of those conversations and the discussions that might ensue with regards to that. The competence framework also provides clear development pathways, so if you are starting at an entry-level project manager, which is the lowest level project manager role profile that we have within the competence framework, and you want to be able to see your progression and development through your career as a project manager, then you can see how you can improve, what areas you need to develop, and how those role profiles change over time. So it helps to have that clear development pathway and also support organisations in making sure those opportunities are available for people to be able to develop within there. One of the key things from my perspective is the fact we do have that variety of role profiles that covers project, programme, portfolio and PMO. So you can then get the clear career progression not only through one particular strand of that, so whether it's specifically in project management or programme management or one of the other strands, but also you can individuals can see how they can switch between strands within the profession. So if you're working as a project manager but specifically want to move into programme management, again you're aware of the competencies that you need to be able to show and develop to be able to take on that role. And also for other areas within the organisation as well. Just because you've been a project manager doesn't necessarily mean your career progression is going to go project, programme, portfolio. In fact, some of the best portfolio managers and programme managers come from outside the project management space, depending on the organisation that you speak to. Particularly in portfolio management, when we were looking at the research into the competence framework, a lot of individuals we were talking to had actually come from other areas of the business, potentially in financial areas or general management, and moved into portfolio management. So being able to have those clear role profiles and again those clear competencies that people know they have to demonstrate and develop over time, then it just allows that clarity of moving into those roles, and the competence framework can really support that. With regards to building more competitive capacity and capability, by being able to identify people's strengths, I think is a really key part of this, and to be able to promote those strengths and also that team environment within the organisation, I think is a very key thing. Also identifying and addressing those skills gaps. If you identify that you have got the skills gaps through using the competence framework and start to fill those, then as an organisation, your projects, programs, portfolios will be delivered more efficiently, and you get better results as a result of that. And also by aligning to professional body benchmark, it gives that opportunity of getting that added value from the professional body viewpoint, and adding that into the mix to make sure that there is that commonality of language and those common goals as well, and also demonstrating value to stakeholders. That covers the main advantages really from the competence framework point of view with regards to the competence framework and how that can benefit your organisation. I'm going to hand over to Nick Jones now to talk you through the APM model of professionalism.
Okay, thanks Jill. As Jill mentioned in the introduction, I'm a Senior Membership Development Manager with APM, so it's my team's role to work with organisations in terms of APM resources and helping to develop their communities. So just really wanted to give you a bit of context in terms of the framework by actually just giving an overview of how that would fit into our model of professionalism. So APM's model is based around our 5 dimensions of professionalism, which is effectively our definition of the type of attributes that we would expect individual professionals to be able to demonstrate, and therefore hopefully mirrored through what an organisation actually offers in terms of its professional development scheme. So when we talk about these 5 dimensions, what we're effectively looking at is breadth, depth, achievement, commitment, and accountability. What we mean by those is that in terms of the breadth, it's around the organisation from that. The achievement is around actually gaining formal qualifications which help individuals in terms of their development, but recognising it's not also about continual gaining of qualifications. It is about that ongoing continuing professional development as well. And then finally, the accountability in terms of individual membership of a professional body, which recognises individuals' professionalism, and also about individuals being tied to a code of conduct around their ethics and how they conduct themselves professionally. So rather than this being effectively a nice philosophical idea that doesn't necessarily mean anything in practical application terms, APM does have a set of resources that actually cover these areas. So we do have a body of knowledge which covers 69 different areas across 4 main sections across the whole life cycle. We have our competence framework, and that's how the earlier discussion with Gill fits in terms of that depth and actually providing that depth in terms of that assessment of knowledge and application. And then as an output from that, we have a set of qualifications. We have a wide variety of ways of gaining continuing professional development, and also we have individual membership. So currently we have just over 21,000 individuals in membership. So the 5 dimensions really are built into everything we are trying to achieve. So from an individual perspective, the registered project professional, and there'll just be a couple of brief slides on that later on. From an organisational perspective, we have corporate accreditation, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then also we have academic accreditation as well for higher education institutes, and that's part of APM's commitment to the profession in terms of helping to develop project management as a professional first choice. In terms of corporate accreditation, corporate accreditation basically is something that builds on the membership that 500 or so organisations have at the moment, and this has really taken the next stage beyond just being a member, but actually going through a process which APM actually is accrediting the organisation's professional development scheme against those 5 dimensions that I mentioned. From our point of view, we see it important in terms of actually being a differentiator, actually helps organisations stand out as an exemplar in terms of what they're doing. We currently have 57 organisations accredited, so that's within that wider context of 500 members. Offers assurance to stakeholders in terms of what the organisation's doing in terms of professionalising and developing its community, which hopefully has the upshot of better and more effective project delivery. And also from a recruitment and retention point of view, hopefully helps in terms of attracting and also retaining the best talent. Just to give you an overview, these are some of the organisations who are accredited at the moment. So as I mentioned, there are currently 57 organisations. One thing to mention, I think, as well, although inevitably slides like these will tend to focus on the bigger name organisations, accreditation is something that is completely scalable. So one of the logos there in the sort of bottom right corner, for instance, is the Clarkson Alliance, which is a project and construction management consultancy, has a project management community of around 15 people. So it's not necessarily about having huge organisations with huge communities. It is something that's scalable, but it is actually about demonstrating that in terms of the organisation's professional development scheme, you are working against APM's 5 dimensions and actually working towards that more effective professionalism of the community. Just to give a couple of examples of accreditation, probably the best example we have is Shell, which has a global project management academy. They made the decision to align themselves to APM on that global basis. So the Global Academy, in terms of qualifications, is aligned to APM, also in terms of the Registered Project Professional Standard. That's something that's been integrated into the global community and the Global Academy. When they were asked why they decided to work with APM, basically the response was the flexibility, really, in terms of our approach, and also the 5 dimensions and that flexibility that actually gives to the organisation. Another example, and recognising that it is another example from the oil and gas and energy community, but I think slightly different in that we have Petrofac accredited as well. This was an organisation that made a decision to set up an academy within its offshore projects and operations area. So although the organisation is much larger, this is a scheme that actually covers around 120 individuals within the community. What they wanted to do was basically set up a centre of excellence and a real focal point within the organisation for project management. Actually grow the expertise by giving more full-time employees actually dedicated to project management and actually being able to offer them the development, and actually have what they were doing externally verified by APM as the professional body in terms of what they were doing. They did this to the extent that actually they were, I think, the 52nd organisation to gain accreditation, but actually the first one that gained a maximum score because they actually did align themselves exactly to the APM standards. Third and final example, again another big name, but slightly different in terms of Siemens being a global organisation with a global project management academy, but it was actually the UK area of the business that decided to take accreditation from APM. I think this is a good example as well because actually in terms of what they're trying to do, the focus is on the actual application of competence, so not just about the theory. So again, linking back to what Gill's talking about in terms of that competence assessment, it's something that's really key in terms of what Siemens are trying to do, but it is actually about applying that and actually developing the competence. This was something that they saw as so important that they actually decided to tell the world via the New York Stock Exchange that they'd become accredited. So it was something that they really saw as valuable in terms of their business. These organisations, as well as a number of others, we do have case studies for these as well. So the link at the bottom of the page there, the apm.org.uk project management practice. If you actually follow that link, you'll find a number of these case studies and additional case studies as well that you can look at. Just to finish off and just talk about the RPP. Again, not forgetting that the registered project professional is something that is this is what will become the chartered standard. It is something that will be based around, or is based around the 5 dimensions of professionalism. So it is about an individual being able to recognise that they have the capabilities of a responsible leader and actually being able to manage within a complex project environment using those appropriate tools, processes and techniques. It is around being assessed against the 5 dimensions, so that breadth, that depth, so that competence is being very much at the heart of this and being a real enabler, being able to demonstrate the achievement, the commitment and the accountability. So really that was just around trying to frame what we're talking about in terms of the competence framework as that enabler, which does actually help in terms of, from an individual perspective, around the registered project professional standard, from an organisational perspective in terms of the corporate accreditation and actually the gaining of the accreditation and that assessment against the 5 dimensions themselves. So that was basically what we wanted to cover in terms of the webinar. If you actually want to find out any more in terms of what we've covered, there is an area on our website which covers the competence framework. Also, there are areas around RPP and accreditation as well. So please check out the website for more details. There's a frequently asked questions section in the competence framework area, so please have a review of that if there's anything you wanted to actually cover within there. And if there are any post-webinar questions, or if you'd actually like to find out more in terms of accessing the new framework, then please contact one of your business development managers within my team. And we just wanted to leave some time for any questions. So if there are any questions, please feel free to field those now.
Okay, just while waiting to see if any questions do come through, just to point out that the competence framework content, the base content, is available on the APM website for individual use. So if you wanted to have a look at the content, that's there. With regards to the role profiles and some further information that sits behind the competence framework, then that is licensed content. So if you'd like to find out more about how you can obtain a license or what's covered with that license, then please do contact your business development manager and they'll be more than happy to provide you with that information. Okay. It doesn't appear to be any questions coming through, so that's absolutely fine. Like I said, the webinar will be available on the APM YouTube channel by close of play tomorrow, so you have a chance to listen again or look at some of the slides from there. If you do have any questions, then do contact your business development manager, and we will be happy to answer any questions or queries that you have. Thank you for listening.